Evening. This is California Convictions. I'm Aaron Channel. I speak primarily about my experiences while I was incarcerated. I did, a long time in the California Department of Corrections. My primary goal in speaking about my experience is to entertain my audience and hopefully educate or even edify them. Prison was a rough place. Generally, it's all I speak about is my time in prison. This evening, I wanted to speak primarily about my experiences before my incarceration. I was 20 whenever I was arrested. I'd lived a relatively full life. I was a full-grown adult. I grew up in Mendocino County, and that's apropos to the conversation of my incarceration, because Mendocino County is an incredibly rural and beautiful, picturesque part of Northern California. I know that most people, hey Vegas Prison Stories, hey Cellies State Girl, thank you for checking in, both of you. I know most people, whenever they think of California, they think of Southern California, LA, San Diego, or perhaps even the Bay Area. It's sunny California, waves and cities and traffic and industry. But if you go just a couple hundred miles north, which isn't that far if you consider how big and long of a state California is, it really changes. The fog rolls in just a little bit deeper, the clouds get a little heavier, and the trees grow thicker and taller. I come from redwood country. I grew up hiking through woods that I could have walked through for the next month and a half and never seen anybody else. Walking out railroad tracks and through abandoned tunnels, finding old cabins dilapidated in the woods that nobody's touched in 50 years. It was a pretty amazing way to grow up. And it was just an incredible transition to go from spending just all day, every day in unspoiled wilderness or along the coastline with sheer bluffs and salt spray in your face, to concrete and steel. For 20 years straight, there's not a lot of natural wonder or beauty in prison. There's some if you look for it. You see the flower growing through the cracks in the concrete, or you see the sparrow that lands on the yard and forages, but by and large, it is a sparse and barren environment. Mendocino County is also relevant because that's the county in which I fought my case. My case was, hi Rudy Castro, thanks for checking in. My case was really high profile in my county. There are very few murders in Mendocino County. I remember there had been one a couple of months before and everybody had known about it, and then there was my case, and I'm sure there was another murder that made the newspapers 6 months or a year later. But this is in the entire county. Violent crime is very low in Mendocino County because it's a sparsely populated county. So, whenever a child pornographer came from the big city, Santa Ana, with a $10,000 worth of camera equipment and his fancy truck and somehow ended up dead out in the woods of my rural county, it made the papers in a big way. Of course, the district attorney couldn't abide by that narrative. That's not something he was going to push, and so rather it was prosecuted as a hate crime against a gay man. That was a rough thing to deal with in my very liberal county of Mendocino County. I had literally people preparing to picket my trial. Everybody knew who I was, and this was shortly after the aftermath of the Matthew Shepard case in the Bay Area, which was a tragedy. I was compared to the monsters that killed Matthew Shepard, and it was a brutal thing to experience as somebody who'd always considered himself to be kind and loving and taking people at face value. My county is very isolated. The only way you get to it is by going over mountains or along that rural Highway 101, which goes up and down the California coast. Moreover, In my county jail, Mendocino County Jail, we didn't have a lot of hardened convicts. There was not an incredible degree of criminal sophistication. So whenever I did eventually make it to prison, there were a lot of lessons that most people learn in county jail. How to keep your mouth shut, I already knew, but who you were supposed to talk to, what the rules were. I had nobody school me on any of that. Of course, the idea that racism is endemic to prison, that you stick with your own, that you don't go rat to the cops if you got a problem, things like that. It was common sense. It's not like I hit the line without any idea about how prison worked. That said, my criminal naivete absolutely worked to my detriment whenever I hit San Quentin, and I really had to hit the ground running to figure out how to operate as an inmate. Matt Dubbs 650 taps in, and Rudy Castro notes that he remembers the Matthew Shepard case. Yes, my case was just, I think, a year and a half or 2 years after that, but because my case was portrayed in the local papers as a hate crime against a gay man for no monetary reason, the DA said he thought it was a thrill kill. Well, it was compared to that very publicly, and a lot of people were very upset. Thankfully, since the unfortunate newspaper articles went out and all the nasty publicity that the DA and the police department had given the Anderson Valley Advertiser and the Press Democrat information on, Bruce Anderson from the Anderson Valley Advertiser actually retracted a good amount of the information that had originally been put out, noting that there was absolutely no evidence to support the idea that the victim in my case, Donald Perez, had even been homosexual, much less that that's the reason he'd been murdered for. That was a small solace, I suppose, because at that point I was already serving a 17-year prison sentence. But as that information has disseminated, it's made... Excuse me, I'm recovering from a cold, so forgive me if my throat is just a little scratchy. That's also why you've had so few live streams from me in the past week. The district attorney in my case really pushed a toxic narrative, and thankfully the newspaper which ran it has since retracted the narrative entirely and noted that there was no evidence to support it. That has gotten me away from the idea that my case was anything similar to the Matthew Shepard case. But serving time in my county jail, I absolutely had people come into the pod that I was in with 15, 20, maybe 30 people in it, and point me out, go, "Oh my God, that's the guy right there," and want to walk up and talk to me like I was a celebrity or gawk at me like I was a freak of nature, which is an unsettling experience. It's not something you expect, especially whenever you've had your life turned upside down in such a way. I don't mean to play the world's smallest violin for myself. I didn't expect jail or prison to be fun or easy. I just hadn't expected that particular experience. A wonderful thing about Mendocino County, and I'm only going to state it briefly because I could extemporize on it indefinitely, is the natural splendor. I'm going to say the coastline again. The bluffs just drop sheer for 100 feet, and the salt spray shoots up whenever the waves come. The fog rolls in so thick that you can't see 10 feet in front of your face, and the salt smell permeates the whole town. I was a Boy Scout. I'd go hiking out in the redwoods with my troop. I was the camp cook, so everybody would go out and get firewood, and I'd make chili and hot dogs and mushrooms or whatever it is the fellas wanted to eat. We'd sing songs. It was a good life. And then even after I was too old to be a Boy Scout and graduated on to the next chapter of my life, I still carried that love of the outdoors. You can climb a redwood as high as you feel comfortable as climbing it. It's guaranteed that you're going to start getting scared about how tall you are long before you run out of tree to climb. You can hike out in the woods in Mendocino County. They're Fort Bragg, Albion, Casper, Little River. You can pick a trail, and for the first 10 or 15 miles, you'll see some people out for their day hikes, but you set up your tent, you build your fire, and then that second day hiking, you see nobody. Unspoiled wilderness. Maybe you come across deer hiding in the woods, and not city deer, but country deer that are so skittish and ready to run as soon as they realize that you're approaching them, but who have no fear of men whenever they originally see you. They don't know what you are, essentially. It was a beautiful and wonderful way to live my life. I occasionally feel a little bitter about the way that my middle part of my life took. 17 years in prison that I'm not going to get back any way you do the math. That's a hard sacrifice. And anytime I feel just a little down, I think of those first 20 years and the natural wonder, the beauty that I beheld literally every day. I grew up close enough to the ocean, I could walk out my front door and hear the waves if I listened. I couldn't quite throw a rock and hit the cliffs, but it wasn't a 5-minute walk. I was truly blessed, and I still am truly blessed to carry those memories with me. Vegas Prison Stories asks, how long did it take for them to charge you, and how did they catch you? I don't think I ever heard that story. I try and be discreet about some of the details of my case because I have one co-defendant who's still going to get out, hopefully very soon. But that I can talk about entirely. On September 14th of 2001, that's 3 days after the towers fell, myself, Ty Abreu, and August Stuckey went out in the woods with Donald Perez in some context. Either August went out there first and Ty and I came later. I try and be discreet about the details again, but they didn't find the gentleman's corpse until a couple of weeks later, whenever August Stuckey decided that he was going to contact the police and tell them that I had made him commit a murder and that they needed to go arrest me and put him into some kind of protective witness protection program. That was on October 5th, which is whenever they did arrest me. They found me at a Denny's at about 2 in the morning. I had heard that the police were looking for me, and I seriously considered heading north, running. It was a bad plan, and I'm glad I didn't, but I was 20 years old and desperate, and I understood the severity of a murder case. I seriously considered the possibility that I was going to die. I was going to be executed, or at least never step foot outside of a prison cell again. Sentence of life without the possibility of parole. I sat at a local Denny's for about 3 hours at 11 p.m. all the way until 2 a.m. or something like that, waiting for a cop to come by. I knew if I hung out there for long enough, somebody would. It was an officer with whom I was acquainted, and I felt so bad for her because she and I had a good rapport. She was a nice woman. And she came into Denny's, I think, just to get a coffee at the end of her shift or something like that. And I saw her sit down at the bar, watching her out of my side eye, eating my meal and just biding my time. And whenever she saw me, her face dropped and she went white. She sat down at the bar for about another 1 minute, I think just trying to be discreet, not draw too much attention to herself, and then casually walked back out the front door. It wasn't 10 minutes later that a group of detectives, I believe there were 5 detectives and 2 uniformed officers behind them, came barreling into the Denny's quite quick, and their holsters were unbuttoned, but they didn't actually have their firearms out. They said they had some questions for me regarding a crime that had happened. From there, it was a done dada, essentially. They took me to the county jail and questioned me for a number of hours regarding the details of the case, and I just told them I didn't know what they were talking about. I suppose the smarter thing to do, would have been to just tell them I wanted my lawyer, but I hadn't realized at that point that August had put quite so much effort into framing me, or at least into giving the cops evidence which implied that he was innocent and that I was guilty. So there was nothing that I was going to say or do that was going to get me out of that interrogation room. Slick Armor says Cleveland, Ohio, repping. All right, Slick Armor, rep your territory, absolutely. And Shadow Pit checks in. Gina Lester asks if I got a public defender or whether I was able to afford my own defense attorney. My sainted mother offered to mortgage her home to get me a defense attorney. I've heard her say a number of times that it's one of her real regrets that she didn't do it whenever I told her that it wouldn't help. I honestly don't know if my court case would have went differently if I'd had a paid attorney. I can tell you that the case against me was tenuous. That's the reason that I got the plea bargain that I did. They had very little physical evidence. They had very little testimonial evidence. Possibly I could have beaten it. However, what I received was referred to as an alternate public defender. Because my co-defendant, Ty, had the main public defender's office representing him, the state paid a private attorney named Jan Cole Wilson to represent my case. At the time, I was pretty excited to have a private attorney being paid for by the state. However, I did ask around at the time and asked around since, and she was notorious for negotiating plea deals which were not necessarily beneficial to her clients as part of her work as an alternative public defender. But I don't want to speak ill of her or suggest she didn't do her job to the best of her ability by any means. Because as I look back at my case, I don't know what more could have been done because I didn't go to trial. I elected to take a plea bargain. Whenever they convicted my co-defendant Ty Abreu of the murder of Donald Perez and he received a sentence of life without the possibility of parole, I was quick to take whatever deal they offered me that didn't have a life sentence attached to it after that. I was concerned that with the leverage of the idea that he would never get out of prison if he didn't play ball, that he might elect to perjure himself on the stand and say things that were untrue but which implied my guilt to a real degree in order to get himself a lesser sentence. Essentially, whenever you're in court, even if there's no physical evidence, even if nobody knows who did what, somebody's standing up there on the stand and pointing at you and saying, that's the man right there, he did fill in the blank. That right there, it can be enough to convict you. I spoke to my lawyer about it at the time, and she said because of the small amount of evidence against me, I would have actually had a strong appeal based upon paucity of evidence, which is an indicator that the case was very weak against me. That said, it's all in the past, water under the bridge, and there's no use crying over spilt milk. Dwyer Jones suggests that the talk I'm giving now should be the core narrative of the first chapter of my book. And in fact, I've been thinking about the book that I'm going to write first. I like to think I have more than one book in me in my life. That's exactly what I've been trying to think of, is where this thing is supposed to start. I have pages of notes, and I wrote quite a bit about San Quentin in my free time because it was such a unique experience to go to just one of the most dangerous places in the state. I cannot overstate how serious the Badger section at San Quentin was. I tell people I went to High Desert, and they go, oh, wow, that is a serious pen. And they're not kidding, it was a serious pen. B Yard was a relatively easy yard at High Desert. Badger section at San Quentin was the worst part of San Quentin. It was where they sent people who were going to the worst prisons. That place was rocking and rolling. It was scary. And I've been trying to decide whether it's wise to start my book, whenever I write it, in Mendocino County Jail, or prior to my arrest whenever I was a civilian in the county of Mendocino, or perhaps there in San Quentin as a fresh fish who didn't know what the rules were and who was just trying to keep his head above water. Thank you for weighing in on that. I very well may start there where I had my narrative. Justin McCoy asks, how long into my sentence did it take for me to get over the anger of being an innocent man stuck in prison? I do want to be clear that I'm innocent-ish. I did not do the things I was accused of. I'm firm on that. That said, I did commit criminal actions. I was criminally complicit in the whole thing, and wow, I got a lot more time than I reasonably thought that I would have, but it was a murder case, and if you're involved in a murder case, even peripherally, you can reasonably expect they're going to break you off if you don't cooperate. As for whenever I got over it, if we're being frank, I'm not sure that I have or will. I have a little core of bitterness in me, and I'll probably carry it with me till the day I die. Which isn't to say that it runs my life or that there's anything wrong with mourning lost years. It was from the age of 20 to the age of 37. That is a long time in prison. I got a little bit of college education in there, thankfully, so I can't say that it was wasted. My wife was with me the whole time, so it's not like they were bad years. Any year that she and I were together was a good year, and that's just a fact. Still, to say that I'm not a little bitter, a little salty about it, I think that would just be a lack of self-awareness, because you only have so many years in your life, and I know what happened to 17 of mine. That said, and I've said it before and I'll say it again, pedophiles, people who hurt children, there are statistics on how many children they hurt before they get caught, and it's not a small number. Most of them offend and reoffend and reoffend. 17 years. Yeah, worth it. That's all I say. Let's see here. Rudy Castro says I should really consider writing a book, and that is absolutely correct. Oh, Vegas Prison Stories asks if I have an update on Scooby. I am putting together a brief, and it's probably going to be about 3 minutes long, video, a commercial or whatever you want to call it, regarding Scooby's case. He gave me some details about what his court stuff was and assured me that he didn't have any violence on his record or anything creepy or weird. He just committed burglaries, non-violent burglaries. He's been in for 27 years. For anybody who's interested, his name is Brandon Mays. His CDC number is E38383. You reach out, I'll put you in touch with him, because he's a legitimately decent man from everything that I saw. He could have easily taken advantage of me whenever I hit high desert. I was a fish. I didn't know what the rules were. Instead, he looked out. And from what I saw, he did that for a lot of other people. I've told the story before about the guy that he traded him, I think it was 150 sack lunches for a television. That's just the most decent, and I'm not going to tell the whole story, but man, Scooby's a good dude. I'm putting together a video and setting up a GoFundMe on his behalf. He's going to go to board in just about another year, and I'm trying to get the money together to get him a decent attorney, and I figure a GoFundMe and a little commercial will be the best thing that I can do for him. So a real update, as in, as much information as I can provide, and a nice commercial to go with it, and contact information and all that, should be forthcoming within the next 2 weeks. I'm just trying to make sure that he approves of everything I say on his behalf, because the last thing I'd want to do is speak on his behalf and say something that wasn't exactly what he wanted said. Gina Lester says she could listen to me talk all night long. Unfortunately, I only have about a half hour or so in me because I am recovering from a cold. But I am considering doing a longer live stream. I generally restrict these to about a half hour because I just don't know what to talk about. That said, I don't see the numbers of people watching dwindling as we get to about that half hour mark. If anything, I notice a couple more people checking in. So next week, or perhaps later in this week, I think I will try doing an hour-long live stream and see if my audience enjoys that just a little bit more. I suppose I'd like to take this moment to thank anybody who did tune in. I'm happy to talk about any aspect of my life or my prison experience, or heck, life in general, that y'all want to talk about. I love this format where you guys pop up a question there on the screen to the side of me, and you tell me what you're interested in hearing about, and then I extemporize from there. So again, thank you for listening. Justin McCoy asks if I ever had to contemplate stabbing someone but came to my senses. In the series that I did talking about San Quentin, I have a playlist, I believe it's called San Quentin State Prison. I came very close to, my co-defendant, Ty Abreu, was there with me in Badger Section, and again, this was a serious place. The shot caller, Sam, had a piece, and he told me, listen, here's the deal. He's getting hit. He's a rat. He ratted on you. He testified against you. You say he's your friend. Here's your chance to prove it, because you could just hit him once or twice, nice and gentle, to get him off the yard. Or my boy Filthy over there is going to open him up from stem to stern. I believe he said he's going to gut him like a fish, now that I think about it. I may have. It turned out that I didn't have to, because Ty got out under the bell. He stayed one step ahead of the punchline, and he went PC just a couple of days before he was supposed to get hit. I seriously considered putting a hole or two in him to make it so that he didn't get hit too hard. And that is the strangest sentence that I think I'll ever say, that I considered stabbing my friend to protect him. But prison is an insane place, and yes, that is the kind of question, the kind of situation you can find yourself in behind those bars. The guy's going to get stabbed. That's just what it is. He's going to walk through that door, and we're going to get him. Do you want to do it? Or should my homie over there do it? And you look over at the homie, and he's just raring to go, because what he wants is to go to the SHU with some good paperwork saying that he got himself a rat or a child molester or some piece of garbage and just stabbed him silly. Ideally, you don't want to kill him. That's something you have to understand about a prison stabbing. Very few of them are intended to be fatal. You don't want a murder charge. What you want to do is you want to give him one big piece of shit cut right there across the face, so everybody who sees him for the rest of his life knows he's a piece of garbage. And then you want to stab him in the stomach, right here. 15, 20, maybe 30 times, nice long jagged cuts. The reason why is that's how you give somebody a colostomy bag. It's very unlikely to kill them. If you want to kill somebody, you hit them in the brachial or the femoral. You want to just ruin their lives, cripple them. First, you mar their face, you scar them nasty. And then just keep hitting them in the stomach until they drag you off of them or until they threaten to shoot. Prison's a harsh place. Badger Section was a harsh place. As it turned out, Ty got out of there. But yeah, that's the closest I came to really considering doing harm to somebody while I was locked up. The second would be Bull. And there was an occasion where Bull, I think he was sex playing me. He was seeing what would happen if he pushed up on me in a way. It was a punk check. But he made a joke one time. I don't remember exactly what it was, but he said something like, I looked so good he was going to have to hop in that shower with me next time I got in there. I had a friend that had a piece. I didn't start showering with that piece, but I seriously considered. I made sure that it was available to me. Not that I want to hurt anybody, but don't want to get hurt either. And again, prison is a serious place. I try and keep the content of my videos uplifting, edifying is what I say. I try not to focus too much on the blood and the gore and the smell and the concrete, but prison's a nasty place, and sometimes the question is, are you willing to put a piece of steel in somebody? Maybe you don't have to, but are you willing to? Rudy Castro drops $5 for the channel. Hey, thank you. I appreciate that. And I'll keep telling the story regardless, man, but hey, every penny helps. Thank you. Let's see here. Vegas Prison Stories says, we appreciate the time you put in, Ari, and he calls me brilliant. I tell you what, I love that compliment. And Vegas Prison Stories, who has a good YouTube channel, and he's just starting out, but man, he's getting better fast. He did me the privilege of shouting me out in one of his videos, and that's the adjective he used, was brilliant. And man, that man knows the way to my heart to flatter my ego. Flatter my intelligence. That is absolutely the right move. Justin McCoy says he's glad I made it out of hell on earth. Me too. Do you know what I did today? I slept in. I woke up and did just a little bit of work on the computer and made enough money to go out with my wife and have a beautiful lunch. I made a meal for my boys. I sat down. I took some notes for my book. And I'm doing a live stream with y'all. If I could go back 10 years, I guess 10 years ago I would have been at Chino. And that place stunk and it was loud and everybody was angry all the time. And there were a lot of people who had HIV in the building I was in, which isn't the end of the world, but man, I was careful with my hygiene. And tell myself this is what life was going to look like in a decade, I sincerely might have just broke down crying right there with joy. I am blessed. I am, and I'm glad I made it out of there too. Gina Lester says, I've been trying to find a pen pal. I'd love to write him. Gina, the website is called JPay, J-P-A-Y. If you make an account on that website, they let you email inmates, and the emails go back and forth. You don't even need to correspond by pen and paper. The price is just one stamp, same as anywhere else. His name is Brandon Mays. That's M-A-Y-S. And his CDC number is E38383. Anybody who wanted to write him, reach out to the channel. I'll put you in touch with him because, again, that dude could have done me dirty. I walked into CDC not knowing up from down. I was a fish. And I made it through San Quentin through luck and by the skin of my teeth. What I did is I counted my words every day. And I mean that literally. I stepped outside of the cell, and you're only going to be outside of the cell for a couple of hours the whole day long. And I'd keep a little running tally in my head of how many words I said. If I could just say one word instead of 5, no instead of no, I don't think so, sir, I said 1. I think that was the only reason that I didn't have more of a hard time at San Quentin than I did. It's just because I kept my mouth shut and people didn't know who I was. And because that was a serious, scary yard, well, you assume everyone there is serious and scary. I couldn't run that same ruse at High Desert. I was there for too long. I met too many people. And I was honest about who I was, just some kid who happened to get in trouble and go to prison. Scooby could have taken real advantage of me. He didn't. He treated me fairly, and heck, he taught me the ropes. And there was one occasion where somebody was just playing, but he ran up and grabbed me. And Scooby was right there, man. And if there had been any problem, if somebody had ever come at me the wrong way, or if there had been a riot, I don't doubt for a second that man would have had my back until his dying breath. I just got an email from him a couple of weeks ago. Not a couple of weeks ago, a couple of days ago, I think last Thursday. And he was talking about how he can't believe that he's had to spend 27 years in prison without ever hurting anybody, without committing a violent criminal act in his life. It is what it is, but it's a tragedy. I saw way too many evil, I don't even use the word lightly, but yes, evil men get out of prison just because they'd reached their parole date and they couldn't keep them in prison any longer. The idea that somebody is eligible to come home, he had a life sentence, was denied parole. Just based on a drug history, 14 years old, and burglaries 13 years before that, it is an offense. Gina asks if I ever had a horrible cellmate. I'll tell a brief story. I've spoken before about how whenever I was at High Desert State Prison, I stuck my nose into some criminal business, and I ended up having to go SNY. SNY is Sensitive Needs Yard. It's protective custody. It's witness protection, basically. What happened is that there was something going on. I couldn't countenance it. I couldn't keep my mouth shut. I wouldn't be able to look myself in the mirror the next day. So I went to the administration and told them. From there, I was green-lit. There's no way I could go back to that yard. They would have perforated me like a piece of Swiss cheese meat in its cheese grater. Instead, they put me back into a protective custody program called the PMU, the Placement Management Unit. The deal is, they give you bad Cellies back there, and they do it on purpose. They keep some guys that can't program anywhere else back there in the PMU. They sell you up with them. And the deal is that if you're trying to sneak back to the PC part of the prison, maybe you have somebody you want to hurt, maybe the gang has a hit out on somebody and you're going to go get them. Well, if they made it easy to go back to protective custody, too many sleepers would get through, so they make it difficult. There's a process. It takes months of being in an isolated area, of having bad cellies, of not getting program. Before I rolled up, I'd been visiting with my wife, usually every weekend, sometime every other weekend. Physical contact, hugs, kisses, 7 hours a week. It was 1 hour a week behind glass with a phone whenever I was in the PMU. That was the hardest part. The second hardest part was without a doubt the cellies they gave me. The first cellie they gave me had a colostomy bag because he had the piece of garbage cut too. The way I was describing, they get you when they get you. Well, he'd been got like that. I didn't mind the colostomy bag, except he also had serious mental illness. He was not quite right in the head. One of the ways this manifested was with feces fixation, and I don't want to give too much detail on a public forum because for all I know somebody's eating or there are children watching, though I wouldn't advise it, kids. This is not content appropriate for anybody under the age at which criminal behavior might be something they have to think about and be advised to not commit. But it was awful. The smell was atrocious, and whenever I went to the cops about it, they basically told me, well, go back to the line if you don't like it, or go in there and handle your business, touch the guy up, and teach him who's in charge. That was a bad cellie. I only had him for about 2 weeks, and it's not like this was a constant thing. It was an occasional thing, but it was nasty. Whenever they finally got me out of his cell, they moved me in with a dude named Jimmy. And Jimmy tried to kill me in my sleep. That's what happened with Jimmy, and it didn't work out for him. I was about that much too quick. It was close. I remember clearly the moment where he was coming at me with a sharpened piece of glass and his hands were wrapped, and I was coming off my rack. And I had a sheet in my hands because I'd been asleep, and I tried to twist and isolate the knife. That's the rule. If somebody comes at you with something that you need to defend yourself against, you step back as much as you have to and use both hands to try and get control of that weapon, especially if you have a sheet or a towel or something that will protect your hands. You want to wrap it, you want to twist it, and then you want to turn their hand in the opposite direction it's supposed to go, isolate the weapon, and take it from them. I managed to isolate the weapon, but I wasn't able to get it out of his grasp because he stepped back to his corner of the cell. But that's as close as I came to, wow. Actually, talking about that kind of brings up the PTSD a little bit. That was one heck of a moment, and I have done a video on it. I don't recall what the name of the video was, but I'm sure it's easy enough to find if somebody goes through my channel. Justin McCoy suggests that drug offenders shouldn't even be housed with violent offenders. CDC has a pretty, and not perfect, but pretty efficient way of determining who should go where. They start by going by your commitment offense and a number of other factors, like if you have a criminal history, if you've been in prison before, if you're a gang member, if you committed a violent offense, if you have a college education, if you have family that visit you, so on and so forth. And they say this thing is worth 3 points, that thing is worth 7 points, this thing is worth negative 10 points. There's a scale. And then once they've weighed all of these things together, that determines what custody level you'll be set at. That in and of itself is kind of harsh. For instance, myself, I ended up on a 4-yard housed with some seriously violent and scary people because I was serving such a lengthy prison sentence. The nice thing about that system is that if you program, if you don't get in trouble, they drop your points every single year. So even if you start out as a real high custody inmate, I started out with 70 points, meaning that I would have to not get in any trouble for, I think, 5 years to have even a chance of being reduced to a lower custody level. But if you follow the program and if you behave yourself and if you keep your nose clean as best as you can, your points drop, and little by little you end up with less violent and less violent inmates. Similarly, you have some guys that start out at a fire camp. They came in on just the dumbest little charge. They came in on a DUI for their 7th offense. But they like to drink and fight. And so they work their way up the points real quick. And so you would see some guys on 4 yards who started with just no time at all and had managed to extend their stay to a pretty ridiculous amount. Shaliste Girl notes that the video in which I speak about my cellie Jimmy coming at me whenever I was asleep was called The Closest That I Came to Dying in Prison. Thank you for that. Justin McCoy says, the guy that was my cellmate who decapitated his mother was actually a nice guy. In my experience, and I've had the dubious privilege of having honest conversations with dozens of murderers, you run into two types of violent felons. You run into habitual violent felons, by which I mean there are some people for whom violence is simply a tool in their toolbox. Maybe it's not their first solution. Perhaps you yell at them and they'll politely take it. But in their head, it's always possible, whenever they run into a problem, that maybe this can be solved with a knife instead of with words. You have to be careful of those type of guys. That's a cold-blooded killer, I suppose, is what I'd say. And then you run into another type of killer, the hot-blooded killer. I've had numerous murderers say to me something along the lines of, I don't know what came over me. I can't believe I did that. My whole life, I never did anything like that. I've been looking back for the past 15 years, and I would never do that. I don't know why I did. That's your hot-blooded murderer. Both cold-blooded and hot-blooded murderers, some of them are kind people. They're decent, easy to get around along with. I knew more than one person who, frankly, had committed an atrocity that I was able to hang out with, to have lunch with, and play cards with, and so long as you were willing to forget the fact that he'd done whatever it is he did, well, you could cohabitate with them, no problem. Some of them are very nice guys, just like you said. Oh, 5 years clean, Justin McCoy? Congratulations, man. That's like 1,700 days. That's like 1,700 battles. It's real easy to forget how hard a day clean can be whenever you say 5 years clean. I was just speaking to Scooby the other day. Man, he's got a lot of clean time. He's been clean for, 14 years now. He said that just a little while after he rolled up from the line, he asked himself, I've ruined my life. I'm a failure. How can I fix this? And he couldn't think of an answer. And he said to me, I asked myself, what would Aaron do? Wow, what a compliment. And he quit doing drugs. He got himself his GED, his associate's degree, his paralegal. Let's see here. I'm just making sure I didn't miss anything in the comments. If anybody had a question or anything like that, you feel free to repeat it. Don't worry about spamming the chat so long as you're not hitting it 10 times in a row. It's hard to keep track of everything that goes by in that little screen off to the side whenever I'm trying to talk. I believe I'm only going to speak for just a couple more minutes because my throat is a little worn. But I wanted to close by again speaking about Fort Bragg, Mendocino County, the place I grew up, because I was thinking about it. I moved away from there. The aftermath of my crime, the fact that people still know me, that I literally have people who point me out, that's the guy, it made it hard to live there. I'd love to go back someday. I miss my home. It's the most beautiful place I've ever been. I suppose most everybody feels like that about where they grew up. We're like salmon, I suppose. We want to go back to where we were born. That said, I miss it. Beautiful, picturesque, rural, redwoods, salt spray. Gina Lester asks if I'm considered a felon for life and whether I can visit other countries. What's my life like? I am absolutely a felon. I was actually just looking into flying recently, and I'm automatically a high-risk flyer because I'm a convicted violent felon. In a couple of years, if I don't get in any trouble, which I consider a foregone conclusion, but life's a crazy thing, I will be able to apply for a certificate of rehabilitation. I will still then be considered a violent felon. That never goes away, but they put a little check mark in my file saying that I took every step to rehabilitate myself and that there is no reason to believe that I'll reoffend. That's the closest you get to getting the slate wiped clean, and I look forward to accomplishing it. As for my life personally, as I said, I am blessed. I don't see concrete and steel surrounding me on every side, and even if I did, it doesn't matter. You can wake up with a smile and you can go to bed with a smile, even in a bad place. It's just about being sincerely grateful for every breath you draw. Because we only have so many of these days. There's going to come a day whenever each and every one of us is looking back, wishing we could just have one more year, one more month, one more day, one more hour of this natural beauty, the wonder that we live. I don't take it for granted, not 1 minute. I am blessed and I love my life. Okay, I'm going to close here. I want to thank everybody who took the time to chat with me today. I'll hopefully be doing another live stream later in the week once my throat clears up a little bit. And one more time, thank you for listening.